Hello and welcome to this video in which I tell you all about foundation paper piecing, how it works, and my favorite tips and tricks to make it as easy and approachable as possible. Let's go. If you know my other videos, you might be a little bit surprised right now because usually my videos are in German. I am German. Most of my customers are in Germany, but all my patterns are available in German and in English. So sometimes I get asked by my English-speaking friends and customers how something works. I always direct them to my German videos because I add subtitles to them. So if you look at through my channel, there should always be the option to choose closed captions, so CC, and then choose the language, choose English, and then you can watch the videos. They will be in German, but there will be English subtitles. I already have a video that explains this technique in German, but because lots of my patterns work with foundation paper piecing, and because it's just slightly easier to hear the English words and then you can concentrate on the actions in the video. So I thought we also, especially for this important technique, we need a video in English as well. I'm part of a group of wonderful quilters here in Auckland, where I live, the Monday Modern Quilters, and we are currently working on a charity quilt that uses many of these woven star blocks. And this is a perfect block to sew with the foundation paper piecing technique. So I'm shooting this video for this group to explain a couple of things for the people who are maybe not quite this familiar with this, with my favorite technique. And I thought I'll just turn this into a YouTube video as well, so then more people can see how I do this. So this is the block. It's called a woven star because depending on how you arrange your fabrics, it looks a little bit like these lines in the star are woven kind of into each other, right? And this is doable with templates and classic patchwork methods, but it's just so much easier and always very, very precise if you sew it with a foundation paper piecing technique. What is this FPP, foundation paper piecing? It's a method for which you need templates like this, and you sew your block, your fabrics, onto the paper, which is your foundation, and assemble this block, but don't worry, the paper doesn't stay in. At the end, you remove the paper, and then you have your finished block. And we do this so we can piece these blocks with odd angles, piece odd shapes easily, and receive a very, very precise result. Again, this you could do with traditional methods. There are other blocks, there's just no way that you could do them with traditional methods. This here, for example, is my P Waka Waka foundation paper piecing pattern. And as you can see, this consists of many, many small pieces in odd angles. And it's just no way you can piece this with traditional methods. It is absolutely possible with foundation paper piecing. But also simpler designs like these, for example, these designs here. Probably possible with traditional methods, but it's just so easy and quick with foundation paper piecing. This is my key fob pattern, what the fob, that comes with 5 different designs. I also have a pattern called Fob It. Here's an example for that, which also works with this technique and makes for a quick gift. This is actually, if you want to try your hand at foundation paper piecing with a quick and small project, then this What the Fob is the pattern for you. FPP might look complex, but it really is easy. How easy, I will show you now. What do you need? first of all, you do need your template. This is one that I drafted for the group or for this Woven Star. You'll find, if you Google free foundation paper piecing templates, you'll find lots of free ones. I have a freebie that comes straight into your inbox if you subscribe to my newsletter. You can buy lots of different designs. There's just so much on the market. Just do a bit of a Google search and you'll find a lot of great ideas. So print that out on just regular copy paper. There's special foundation paper piecing paper. It's not necessary. Just your regular printer paper is absolutely fine. This is an 80 gram per square meter weight. Totally fine. Print it out. It's important to print it at 100% scale. It is possible to scale your blocks larger, smaller, everything with your printer setting. I might explain as to how this works in a different video for today. For this, let's go with 100% scale, so your final block then has the correct dimensions. You will need fabric or fabric scraps. Scissors are always helpful. A patchwork ruler. This is an add a quarter ruler, which is helpful, but it's not necessary. I show you how to use it in this video as well. You need your rotary cutter. I like working with two different ones because sometimes you need to sew through the paper. So I have one, this is Papier, that means paper in German. I have one for fabric, one for paper, always on hand, so I don't need to switch blades, and my blade for fabric just lasts longer this way. And that's basically all you need. I also like using like a glue roller. You can also use any other kind of glue, like a sew line glue pen or something like this, but it also just works with a regular pin. But now let's get started on getting prepped before we start sewing. I find that this is the most important step to make the sewing process really enjoyable and easy. So let's get started with that. I always prep my templates well before I start sewing. That makes for a very relaxed sewing process. I start by marking all of my different fields. But what does field mean? So when we start to sew, what we do is we add the paper on the non-printed side of the fabric, and we sew on this side of the fabric. And we stitch through both the paper and the fabric on the other side and attach it to the paper that way. Okay, so in order to keep track which fabric goes where, I like to mark these different fields with the fabric that needs to cover those specific fields. You can do that in all kind of different ways. For example, if you have a block that uses lots of different colors, then you can use pencils or whatever and just give it like a quick mark with a colored pencil. Green goes there, blue goes there, and so on and so forth. That really helps you keep track during your process. In this case, this is all pink, so that makes it a little trickier to mark. I'll just write the fabric into it. So I'll probably recreate something similar to this. So I find like features in these prints that make it easy for me to track. So this is a flower print. So I know one of these stripes is a flower pink. So I'll just write flower here, this one, and then it comes out here on the other side. Flower, right? So that's the first one. Then this is the speckled fabric. Let's make this here. This will go onto the side here. So it's this and this field. And I call it speckled. There you go. I'll do this with the other fields as well, and everything that I don't mark, where there's no word in it, I know that's the background fabric. That's all it takes to mark. Okay, now that all my fields are marked, I will roughly cut out all of these elements. Each one of these elements is one wedge in this finished block that needs to be sewn with the foundation paper piecing technique. And then at the end, we put them all together to our final block. That's not always the case when you sew foundation paper piecing. Sometimes it's a simple design, which is then just one element that you turn into your slab, I guess, or panel, and then you're done. You remove the paper and you're done. Many other designs consist of several pieces that you then have to assemble at the end. But for now, I'll just very roughly cut this out. It doesn't need to be straight or pretty. Some people cut it along the dotted lines. That's fine too. While I'm on the topic of some people do it differently, there are so many ways to do foundation paper piecing, to work on the different process steps. You might have learned this a different way, which is totally fine. You might see different ways. You might prefer different ways. That's all good. There's no one way of doing this. I'm just here to show you my favorite way that might give you some ideas to try out. And ultimately, you just need to find what works best for you, right? So yeah, this is not the only way, definitely not. I like doing it this way, very roughly cutting this out, and then I pre-fold my paper pieces. I pre-fold each piece along these lines, not along the dotted line, just the inside lines. Those are the ones that we will sew along. This line here, this will be this seam line here. So everything that's on the inside, we will then see on our block. This line between this solid line and this dotted line is the seam allowance. Okay, so we need to cover this with fabric too, that's important, but this will not be visible, just as a quick explanation. So we fold along all of these lines, just like that. I like doing this. If I sew a whole quilt with all of these blocks, I batch prepare all of this. I print them out, I roughly cut them, I mark them, and then I sit with a big pile of this in front of the TV, watching a movie in the evening, pre-folding all of these fabrics, and not using my precious sewing time during the day. It's never enough of that, right? Don't want to waste it. Okay, so why do I do this? There's two reasons. One, when it comes to removing the paper, I find that pre-folding it helps me remove the paper a bit easier. Also, you will see during the sewing steps, I need to fold back the paper, and it is much easier to do that when it's pre-folded. And the third reason, I think I said I have two, I actually have three. And the third one is when I have to align or position the fabric on the back. I obviously can't see those printed lines very well. Sometimes you can see them shine through a bit. But if you work in bad light or something like this, you can't see the printed lines. But if I fold them, I can. So it helps me position my fabric on the back. Right, so these are all prepped, and finally we can get started and start sewing all of these. As I said, we now need to cover this side with fabric on all four of these pieces. And we do this in order of the numbers that are in the fields on the side. So we first start filling field number 1 on this side. And we will find a piece of fabric that we add to the back and temporarily attach either with some glue or with a pin. And that piece of fabric needs to cover this whole field. And as I said, these lines help you to see where it needs to go. But it doesn't need to cover just this whole field, but it also needs to reach over the side by the absolute minimum of 1/4 inch, because we need a seam allowance, right? So in this case here, I have this very random piece of a giant scrap, and I don't want to work with this whole big fat giant scrap. So I'll just cut a generous piece off, and I'll now align it over this field. As it's a triangle, I'll just use a triangle, like a corner of this scrap, and I make sure it reaches over these lines generously on all sides. I will then temporarily adhere this piece of fabric onto my field A1. There you go. Like this. I can also use a pin and pin it in place. Sometimes I use glue and pins if it's like a very big field and the fabric is very flappy or something. I'll check here. Can you see? I can see the fabric shine through my piece of paper and can see that it is going all around field A1 with a generous seam allowance. And just to make my life a little bit easier, transporting my fabric to and from the sewing machine and so on, I will now cut my scrap off here. There's no exact cutting necessary, which I love. It's just no pre-cutting necessary either, which makes the whole process super, super relaxed. Right, so field A1 is covered. That's the only one that will be covered in this way. I now need to go to field A2. The next step is to fold back my piece of paper on the line between A1 and A2. This is this line. And this is also a reason why we pre-fold it now. This is really easy. I'll fold it back like this. And now I either use my patchwork ruler and align it so that this fold is on my 1/4 inch line on my ruler, and then cut this excess fabric off. Or if I have a 1/4 inch ruler, that kind of does it for me, because it has this little ledge here and I can just bump it across my fold here, and it doesn't slide as easily as a patchwork ruler, and then cut off my excess fabric. So the whole point here is to trim my scrap so that I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance left. Now I unfold and lay the fabric in front of me like this. And now we need to add the next piece of fabric that will then cover A2. I marked this as speckled, so I now choose a speckled scrap. Strips are awesome. I love working with strips. If I have yardage, I usually cut myself some strips that are like about an inch wider than the field that I want to cover. It's super duper helpful, like one of my favorite tips really. So this is how it'll have to go, right? So my field is, I think it's a bit hard to see, so I kind of sketched this now for you. This is one fold in the fabric, sorry, in the paper, and this is the other. So this is my field on the other side, right? So now I will need to eventually have my fabric lie like this. To make that work, I fold it right side together with this fabric along this line here. That's the seam allowance that we just trimmed, like this. And then we will sew it on this side along this line through the paper and both layers of fabric. So we will then have a seam that will go through here. You can then fold over our fabric and it will cover that field, okay? I'll show you how what that will look like, but I just wanted to explain this to you so we know how and where to position this piece of fabric. It can't be like this, because if we then fold over it, it won't cover our field A2 on this side plus the seam allowance, right? And we also don't want it like this, because our seam allowance will go, our seam will go through here, because again, this is the seam allowance, and then we won't have enough fabric left on this side of our field A2. So be generous, okay? It sucks to have to unpick these, so be extra generous. It is a technique where you use a lot of fabric, but if you're not worried about having a bit of excess fabric scraps or rubbish, then you're really making your life easier, right? This is what it looks like. If you want to, you can now stabilize this a little bit by putting a pin through this here, nice and far away from the seam, because we will, in the next step, sew on this side, and you don't want to accidentally sew through your pin, right? I like to just hold it with my fingers, transport it to a sewing machine, and then stitch. If we have a tiny bit of shifting, it's usually not a problem at all. So I try and make this quick and easy for myself. Right, I will take this to the sewing machine. On the sewing machine, I will lie it this way around, and I will now sew along this line between A1 and A2 with a about 1.4 or 1.6 stitch length. So a very small stitch length. That way we perforate our paper, it's much easier to remove it. When I have these points like this, where these lines meet, so my start is in the middle of this block, then I need to, sorry, I totally forgot the vocabulary there for a second. I need to secure my seam by stitching on the spot or back stitching or something like that, right? So if I sew all the way to the outside, I can sew through my seam allowance, that's fine. But when it's in the middle of the block, you need to back stitch here, otherwise your block might easily unravel. Okay, so I take this to a sewing machine, I sew along here with a small stitch length, then I'll show you what this looks like. All right, can you see this? Here, I could have sewn all the way through here, but I like to, especially when 2 points meet along the seam allowance on the outside, I like to do this instead because it's a little bit easier in the folding steps. But I did back stitch here and back stitch here, small stitches along the side, and then ultimately I have sewn through paper and both layers of fabric. In this step now, I first check, I test, I fold this back and see, is this wide enough on all sides? Does it really cover my field A2? Yes, it does. So now I press this. Lots of people finger press or use a roller. I much prefer the iron. With steam even. People say your paper shrinks. I've never had issues with this. And it gives me like nice crisps, edges, points. I feel my result gets even neater and more accurate. So I'll press this now, and then we cover the next field. Okay, here we go. Fields A1 and A2 are covered. Let's go to field A3. So we repeat the last steps now over and over again. We find the line that's between our already covered area and the next field A3, that's this line. We fold our paper back. We then align, let's do it with this time. We align our ruler, the 1/4 inch line along the folded edge. Hold this in place because a regular ruler slips on a paper quite a bit. We trim back our seam allowance. Then we open this back up. Let's check flower fabric. So we now take the scrap of our flower fabric, and can you see the lines shine through? It goes along here, and then here is the start of that row. So I will now align this, whoops, starting here till, so this is where it goes, this is where it comes down. I'll mark this again so you can see this better. And important, this is where lots of people make the mistake to use too short pieces, because we need to imagine that this, like we have the seam allowance here, right? So this will go all the way till about here. This is the field, plus we then need seam allowance. So really be generous, especially when you have angles like this, and cut extra big pieces of fabric, because again, unpicking this short stitch length with paper is really annoying. Right, so we have this piece of fabric in place, turn it around, and now we sew along that line. Okay, this is what it looks like now. You can see I actually sewed through the seam allowance here, and that's totally fine because I don't have another point from any field meet here. Here, because I have another line meet here, I did backstitch. I do need to backstitch in the middle because otherwise, no, this is now, if I wouldn't backstitch here, my seam would stop right here without being secured, and it's just so easy to unravel them. Here it ends, I will cut this later, and then it ends in the seam allowance. So just like in any regular patchwork, I will have some stitches in the seam allowance that will then secure the seam in place. Okay, that's why I do this. If in doubt, just backstitch at each start and end, and then nothing can happen. Okay, right. We now fold this over, check, is our field A3 completely covered? Yes, it is. So I can now press, and then we go to field number 4. Right, field number 4. This is the field, these are the fields that are already covered. This is then the line that leads to field number 4. Let's trim that seam allowance. And this is obviously some background fabric. I can now use triangle scraps. These are nice and large, or make myself a nice big strip here. If I sew like lots of these, then I usually just make myself lots of nice long wide strips that I can then use and cover this side. I'll press this real quick because this is a bit tricky to work with, and then I will align it like this. It's important to check your orientation, right? And that is, it's sometimes a bit tricky because it's a little bit of backward thinking, because you got to flip over and then things are mirrored and so on and so forth. So what really helps me is if I choose my scrap and first I just lay it right side up over the field that it's supposed to cover like this, and then flip it over. So that way I'm sure that the orientation is correct. Right, I'll go and sew this now. All right, this is what it looks like now. I will now just very roughly cut off that scrap. This is all covered, obviously. And now on to last field, number A5. All right, let's check if this can fit. See, this is like, this might be a bit small. Let's see. I add it over here and make sure I overlay this edge quite a bit because of the seam allowance. So about 1/2 inch of this. 1/4 inch, not a 1/4 inch seam allowance, needs to overhang. So yeah, it's a little tight, but it should work. So let's align us here. There we go, hold it in place, and let's see if this works out. All right, that worked out well. It's completely covered. Yeah, you can see all my fields are completely covered with fabric on the other side. Now comes the next step. We trim all the excess fabric and paper back. I want to use my rotary cutter that can be used for paper as well, with like an older blade. And now I will need my patchwork ruler, and I will align the ruler along the dotted edge. And now cut along the dotted edge, and that's really important. Please don't cut along this line, because then you cut off your seam allowance. It would be such a shame that it's not usable anymore. Okay, so along the dotted edge, just align your ruler and trim back. And again, the ruler slips really easily on paper, so make sure you really hold on to that ruler well and push down nice and hard. I think this is my favorite part of this process, because suddenly you can see your block and your pattern appear, right? Isn't that pretty? We'll also now trim these ears off. 1 and 2. All right, this is the first piece done. Nice and tight, nice and clean edges and lines. I will now proceed and do the other 3 parts. So cover these with fabric, and then I'll see you again and I'll show you how to assemble the block. So I assembled all 4 triangles now. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like on the back. And so traditional tutorials now tell you to take the first 2 pieces, lay them right sides together, then pin them together. At this point, you can either use a pin or a clip. Give me 1 second. Clips weren't handy, right? Or you can use a clip, and then go to the sewing machine, just like this, and then sew along that straight line and assemble those 2 pieces that way, or sew these 2 pieces together this way. Then in the next step, you will need to remove the paper from the seam allowance, and then you do the same with this pair, those 2 steps, and then you will have 2 half blocks, and then finally along the long seam here, sew them together. Again, same way, align them, clip them, sew through the line, and then remove the paper. Right at the end, you then remove the paper. I do it a little bit differently, and my way is a little bit less frustrating when it comes to removing paper, which is probably the most hated steps for everybody who the most hated step for everybody who does foundation paper piecing. I remove the paper now when I have all of these little elements here. And I only do that for quite simple blocks though, because it's easy to get confused with the layout otherwise. But in this case, I remove the paper now and then assemble everything in the same order, except I don't sew on the lines. I just sew with a regular 1/4 inch or scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. The advantage is that taking the paper out is way less fiddly at this stage. And I find it doesn't really make a difference with accuracy as long as you have a bit of practice and are good at having an exact 1/4 inch or scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. It is important though, because we have a lot of bias edges in this fabric, that we remove the paper very gently. And to do so, first of all, you start with the last number. So we sewed from field 1, 2, 3, 4, we went through all the numbers. Removing the paper, we do it in reverse. We start with the last field. And I like to, right at the start, just carefully peel a little bit my corner off, and then just pull the paper away sideways. It really is very easy because of that pre-folding and because we perforated with a very narrow stitch. So we very carefully lift this and really make sure we protect our edges and our seams, and that is best done by pulling the paper away sideways. I will do that now for all of my pieces. There we go. Now I'll sew these pieces together just like I would sew regular patchwork pieces together in the same order. Right sides together. I'll make sure I align this edge, and because of our neatly trimmed corners, this is very, very easy to align. I'll pin this as many times as I want to. I'm not a very prolific pinner. I don't pin very much. There we go. And now I sew along those edges with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a 1/4 inch seam allowance minus about a hair width. So just a tiny bit under a 1/4 inch along those lines with a regular stitch length. I like 2.0, whatever works for you. All right, these are assembled, and now we sew along the very last seam. Again, I align those pieces just like I would with regular patchwork. Use a couple of pins. And onto the last seam. Here is the final block. I like to press my seams open in a block like this, just because at this edge here there's a lot of different layers and I wanted it nice and flat. As you can see, the results are just super precise, even though in this video you could see I didn't really pay much attention to accuracy or anything like that. That's what I absolutely love about foundation paper piecing. There's very little stress about it, and yes, it's at the start it's a bit awkward, a bit odd, especially trying to figure out which scrap fits where and so on and so forth. But I promise you, with a bit of practice, this is going to become the most relaxed technique that you can imagine. Maybe second, improv is probably even more relaxed. Anyway, I hope you're going to give this technique a try. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at hello@quiltwerke.com. If you like this video, as always, thumbs up, follow, you know the routine, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.